Well, a little bit of the history of Haiti. Um, Haiti was one of the most beautiful islands in the Caribbean and was discovered by Christopher Columbus, and then the Spanish and French came and colonized here, and there were already native Indians living here, and they basically killed them off, working them in the plantations, and then brought over African slaves. The country was split into two, one side Dominican for the Spanish, and then Haiti for the French. And the French did not treat the slaves well, as you can imagine. This country was an island full of gold and lots of riches in the sugar plantations, coffee plantations, all kinds of things. So some of the African slaves, some of them rose up as leaders among their own people and were tired of the oppression and not being educated, not having any chance to live, right, free. So they decided, because they had brought their own cultures with them from Africa, many of them did witchcraft, and voodoo was their, their practice at that time. So a leader called, is it
Bookman.
Bookman, he was one of the leaders at that time among the slaves, and he made sacrifices to the devil and asking for the freedom for the African slaves in exchange for serving Satan for 200 years. So Satan always gives promises and doesn't deliver. So in a way, they did get their freedom initially, but they sold their souls to the devil. So they revolted against the French in 1804, I believe it was, and they gained their independence. They became the first. Haiti became the first black republic in the world. So in a lot of ways, God already had his mark on this country to be a leader among nations. So it was the most beautiful island in the Caribbean. It had the most riches. It became the first black independent nation, even though it was not done in a good manner. But they killed off all the French, and at that time it was the Napoleon army, right? Napoleon was the leader, and actually because of that, the Louisiana Purchase was sold to the U.S. because Napoleon thought, well, if this little group of people in Haiti can do this to me, what would the Americans do to me? So he sold the Louisiana Purchase to the U.S. But that was in 1804, and if you look at the state of the country over the next 200 years after that, it's been nothing but raped and pillaged, and even the border, if you look from the air, you can see the border between Dominican and Haiti because Haiti is so deforested. They've enslaved their own people, as Mark was talking about, with the Restavek children. 1 in 10 children are slaves in Haiti, and that's enslaving their own. But that pact with Satan was over in 2004, and that was a real marked period in history for Haiti. Aristide was the president still at that time, and he actually had plans to have the pact renewed. When Aristide first started, he was a Catholic priest, but when he became president, he abandoned the Catholic Church and began practicing witchcraft because it provided power. So his plan was to renew this pact, but Christians all over the country rose up and were praying and seeking God for this not to happen. And that day, the day exactly when it was supposed to happen, there was just complete confusion in all the camps of the enemy. And so all of the centers where they had planned to do sacrifices and voodoo ceremonies, they just didn't happen. They didn't happen. And at that time too, Aristide was ousted by his own people. So he lost his power. We had an interim government here for the next year after that, And there really was a shift in the spirit of the atmosphere of Haiti, that oppression had been lifted off. And we still see a lot of the repercussions, obviously, of the people serving Satan, and voodoo is still practiced, but there has been a major shift, and people have been coming to Christ in amazing numbers, especially with the earthquake of 2010, in January 12th, 2010. Nobody was crying to the witch doctors. When that happened, everyone was calling on one name.
Jesus.
Jesus. The name of Jesus.
Yeah.